Hi, I'm Dr. Bertice Berry, and I need to tell you the story. I woke up to the news of the Weeping Time Plantation burning down. It burnt completely to the ground. And I had some calls and some meetings, and then I drove down, and I usually drive down to the Butler Plantation Island, listening to the story of Fanny Kimble, who was an abolitionist who didn't know she was marrying an enslaver who lived there. And the house that burned down last night was built in 1920, but it's on the foundation of the house where Pierce Butler, the grandson of Pierce Butler, and Pierce Butler, the grandfather, owned and operated that plantation, another plantation. He had a rice plantation there and a cotton plantation in St. Simon. And Pierce Butler, the grandson, had so much debt that he had to sell it, and he didn't sell the property because the property wasn't the real worth. The real worth was the people. So up until last year, it was the largest recorded sale of enslaved people. 436 people sold on 2 days. Here in Savannah was the sale. So you'll see people commemorating and memorializing the Weeping Time. There at the Butler Plantation in Darien, direct descendants still live in that area. They tell stories of living in that area. They tell stories of being there or their ancestors being there and what it's like for them to go there. This place holds, it's not a working plantation. It is not open. Nobody lives there. It's not a place where there's weddings and dances, and it's not one of those places. It is a place where the memory of the survival is there. Now, when you see a plantation house, a lot of people see it and they feel the pain and the anguish and the sorrow, and all of that is true. But you're also looking at a place that was built by people who were, even in Fanny Kimble's book, she talks about, they say they were like horses, and she said, but there's no law that prohibits you from teaching horses to read. So if they were just like a horse, why is it that you can't teach them to read? There's one scene in her book where she says her daughter, who was just 3 at the time, said to her nursemaid, who she was my nursemaid, but she was Mr. Butler's slave. She was an enslaved woman. And the 3-year-old, who hadn't been there that long, recognizes this thing. And she says, some people are born free. And the woman didn't respond. And she says it again. The woman doesn't respond. She says it again. And finally, the woman says, free in this world, free in this life. Some people are free in this life. And another woman who was there said, is she trying to say that in heaven she'll be free? That she thinks she'll get to heaven and that she'll be free? No, what she was saying is, you ain't getting to heaven. Anyway, when I went down, historian Hermina Glass-Hill was actually at the church with the Descendants who were telling their stories to the press. And Hermina said, well, I'm going to turn around and come to where you are. And there were some other people we knew there, and we were standing around sharing stories, but hundreds of people were driving up to just marvel, and you could feel something. There's no denying you could actually feel something. Hundreds of people were coming up. One man just walked right over to me and he said, there's too much history lost. There's too much history. I said, yes, sir. And somebody else was crying, and one woman came over and said, well, if it was supposed to stay, it would have stayed. God doesn't let happen what doesn't gonna let happen. If God wanted it to happen, it was gonna happen. And in my mind, I was thinking many of the things that I could do and see if God would let happen to her. But then I remembered I was newly ordained. Anyway, this is a place that just had the Juneteenth ceremony there. Juneteenth celebration was there. There is a Butler Days commemoration that happens there with the Descendants. This is a place where folks, literally the sleeping with the ancestors, where you stay overnight. Brilliant historian goes and stays in places that hold the memories and the impressions of our ancestors. So some people think, you know, oh, one comment was that, you know, well, God burned it down because of what they did to the ancestors. And I'm thinking, well, why wouldn't God have done it while they were doing it to the ancestors? But that's not the point. Folks were saying things like, you know, this is a horrible, horrible place and it should be gone. And this is this. Clearly, they don't live in this area and understand the history that's connected to the area for the people who are descendants of folks who were enslaved there. But let me say this. If I tell the story of the enslaver, I miss the hope of the enslaved. Hope only happens when there is suffering. And that they knew that there would be a day when not only, you know, they'd be in heaven, but their descendants would be free. Why? Because they prayed for it. They believed in it. They did subversive things to make it happen. That's the story that's being told at that place. That's the story that was being told today. That's the story that I see when I see those places. To see what somebody did to my ancestors, that's their story that they got to reckon with. The story of survival and endurance and making it, and the fact that I exist is an absolute miracle when somebody was, some still are, bent on taking me out. You can't make me tell somebody else's story. I can't tell somebody else's story. The stories that I hear of my ancestors are always stories of hope. And if you don't have a story of hope, maybe you should listen to the stories of my ancestors. I love you.